I found two little boys in a freezer. Not a metaphor, not a joke. I mean a big industrial kitchen freezer. Lips turning blue, fingers. Stiff eyes barely open. So let me ask you this, right at the start. What do you do when the people with all the money and all the power look you in the face and tell you that what you saw, what you lived, never happened? My name is Maya William, and for a long time I was just the maid in a billionaire's mansion. The woman in the background wiping fingerprints off glass and making sure the silverware lined up straight. But the day I opened that freezer and saw billionaire Damon Whitmore's 5-year-old twins curled up between sacks of ice like old leftovers, I stopped being the help and became something else, a problem, a witness, and later their mother. Yeah, that happened. I'll start with that night, because once you see children in a freezer, your life splits into before and after. The house was buzzing with music and laughter, crystal glasses clinking perfume and money floating in the air. I was in the kitchen with catering staff trying to stay out of the way like always when I realized it was too quiet for a house that big. No tiny footsteps upstairs, no distant cartoons, no twin voices echoing down the hall. Just this strange, hollow silence under all the noise. Then I heard it. The faintest sound like a muffled whimper or a fist hitting metal. It came from the back where we kept the industrial freezer. My skin prickled. I walked over, pulled the heavy door open, and my heart just dropped. Two boys, Ethan and Eli, were crammed together on a shelf, huddled between bags of ice and frozen meat. Their pajamas stuck to their skin, breath coming out in weak gasps. One blinked at me in slow motion. The other made this tiny sound that didn't even sound like crying anymore. I don't remember deciding to move. I just dropped to my knees, reached in and said, "Sweetheart, hey baby. It's okay. It's okay, I got you." Over and over as I dragged them out into the warm air. The cold hit my face like knives, and I could feel it in my bones that they had been in there way too long. I wrapped them in towels, rubbed their arms and legs, whispered anything that came to mind. "Stay with me. Okay, I got you. I got you." Trying to sound calm when inside I was screaming. That's when I heard the click of heels on marble behind me. Pattern interrupt. This is where it stops being a rescue story and becomes a war. I turned my head and saw her. Claire Lannister Damon's beautiful, flawless, terrifying fiancée. Blonde hair, perfect makeup, perfect everything about her, always a little too perfect, like she'd been rehearsed. She froze in the doorway, looked at the boys on the floor, and let out this big dramatic gasp. "Oh my God! Maya, what have you done?" Before I could even say, "I found them like this," she was screaming at the top of her lungs, "Damon! Damon! Help!" and running toward the hallway like the victim in some expensive soap opera. My brain couldn't catch up. I was still kneeling with two half-frozen children in my hands when Damon came rushing in, face pale, eyes wild. Claire practically threw herself at him, grabbing his suit jacket like she was drowning. "It's Maya," she cried, shaking. "I found her with the boys. She shoved them in the freezer. She was hurting them. I think she's trying to sabotage me before the party." And just like that, the script flipped. I remember saying, "What, Gerna?" "I just found them. I heard them crying. I pulled them out. But my words sounded small, like they were coming from another room." Claire pointed at me with this shaking hand, tears shining in her eyes on cue. "She hates me. Damon, she wanted to make me look bad. She's always judging me. I told you we shouldn't have kept her here." And here's the part that still stings. He believed her. No questions, no pause, no "what happened?" Just raw, blind rage. "You touched my children," he roared. And before I could explain, His hand came down across my face so hard the room spun. I hit the floor, caught myself on my palms, felt warm blood hit my lip. "You disgusting, worthless snake," he said, hauling me back up by my uniform, his face inches from mine. "Who do you think you are laying a hand on my boys?" Behind him, the twins were still whimpering under the towels. I reached a shaking hand toward them. "Please, sir, just listen. I heard them. They were freezing. I saved them. I swear to God. Claire, put them in there. You have to listen." He shoved me so hard, I slammed into the counter, pain shooting up my spine. Claire rushed to the boys, then scooping them up like some angel of mercy, kissing their heads, murmuring, "Oh, sweetheart, it's okay, Mommy's here," while her eyes met mine over their shoulders, and I saw it. Smug, cold victory. For just a second, she let it show. "I should have you arrested," Damon snarled. "You're fired. Get out of my house before I have security drag you out like the trash you are. I don't care if you starve." If it were you, what would you have done? Right then, kept arguing, thrown something broken down. I crawled. I literally crawled toward him with blood dripping from my mouth onto that perfect white floor, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold myself up. "Please," I said. "I need this job. I'm behind on rent. I send money home. I swear I saved them. I didn't hurt them. Please listen to me." "Enough!" Claire screamed, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Get her out!" So I stood on legs that didn't feel like they belonged to me, took one last look at Ethan and Eli, pale, shivering eyes wide with confusion and fear, and walked out of that kitchen. Every step echoed like a verdict. At the doorway, with party music drifting down the hallway and expensive laughter spilling from the ballroom, I whispered to myself, "This isn't over. I'll come back for them. I swear it on my life." The rain started as soon as I hit the street. Cold, steady, almost petty soaking through my coat as I stood outside the estate gate with my cheap suitcase and my busted lip. By the time I got back to my tiny studio apartment in East Hartford, I felt like my whole body weighed 1,000 pounds. I sat in the dark, pressed a warm rag to my face, and replayed everything. Why didn't he even hesitate? Why didn't he ask one single question? And then the answer came, sharp and ugly. In that house, in that world, a black maid's word will never weigh more than a rich white woman's tears. Maybe he loved Claire. Maybe he was blind. Maybe he was scared of scandal. But at the end of the day, I was the easiest one to blame. Do you think that's fair? The more I thought about it, the more something inside me started to shift. They had already taken the one thing I was supposed to be grateful for, the job. What else were they going to do? Embarrass me, call me names, make me poor. I was already there. But those boys, they were still trapped in that house with her. That part I couldn't live with. The next morning, my face swollen and aching, I pulled a hoodie over my head, caught the earliest bus I could, and rode back toward the rich side of town. I got off 4 blocks before the Whitmore estate and walked the rest of the way, ducking behind hedges and trees like some low-budget undercover agent. I told myself I just needed to see them, to know they were alive. I stood behind the wrought iron fence that edged the back garden, fingers curling around the cold metal heart, banging against my ribs. At exactly 9:15, like clockwork, the kitchen curtains opened, and I saw her. Claire, golden hair, perfect, wearing a navy cashmere sweater, holding a delicate mug, like she'd never washed a dish in her life. A few minutes later, the glass doors slid open, and the twins stepped out with a new maid. I didn't recognize younger Nervous, probably hired overnight, after I was fired. Ethan and Eli didn't run to the swing set, or laugh or chase each other like little boys should. They just stood there, close together by the bench, bundled in neat cardigans. Eyes, dull shoulders, slumped like someone had turned down their brightness. "Go on, boys play," Claire called sweetly, sitting on the bench like the picture of domestic grace. "Show me how high you can go on the swing." Eli hesitated. Ethan gave him a soft push, and he obeyed, climbing onto the swing and moving just enough to be a good boy. Claire smiled into her coffee. That's when I saw it. A flash of purple under Ethan's sleeve as he walked past the flower bed. A bruise deep and ugly yellow around the edges. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might throw up. She hurt them. She put them in that freezer. I didn't need a confession. My bones knew. A moment later, Claire walked over to the swing, leaned in close, whispered something in Eli's ear, and suddenly the chain jerked hard. He fell, hit the mulch with a thud, started crying. Claire rushed in, gasped. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened? Did you slip again?" Hugging him too tightly, dusting him off like she hadn't just caused it. Ethan stood nearby, frozen, watching, saying nothing. And right then, I understood what kind of prison those boys were living in. They weren't just afraid of the cold. They were afraid of her. Afraid of speaking, of falling, of breathing wrong. When I got home, I pulled out an old spiral notebook I used to track groceries and rent, and wrote across the top of a fresh page, "Day 1 after the freezer." Then I wrote everything I could remember. The bruise, the fall. Claire's words, the slap, the look in the boy's eyes, the way Damon never questioned anything. When I finished, I stared at the page and realized something important. For the first time, I hadn't written like a maid, I'd written like a witness. That scared me, but it also lit a fire in me. I knew I needed someone reputable, someone with power, someone who couldn't just be fired because Claire didn't like their tone. I scrolled through my contacts until I saw his name, Dr. Morales, the twins' pediatrician. He'd once asked me quietly if I'd noticed the boys being unusually withdrawn, if I'd seen any bruises. At the time, I'd said I wasn't sure because I was afraid of losing my job. Now the job was gone. I called him. "Dr. Morales, it's Maya William," I said. "I'm not working at the Whitmore house anymore, but something is very wrong with Ethan and Eli. I found them in the freezer. I have bruises on my face because when I tried to save them, I got blamed, and I need to talk to you." There was a pause on the line, then his voice calm but serious. "Meet me at the clinic tomorrow morning early. Don't talk about this with anyone else." The next day, I walked into his office with my hoodie pulled low, notebook in hand, heart pounding. He opened the door before I knocked, took one look at my face and said, "You're hurt." "I'm fine," I lied, sitting down. "Tell me what happened," he said. So I did. I told him about the freezer, about Claire's accusations, about the bruise in the garden, the way the boys didn't act like kids, the way she talked about the cold game. Then I slid the notebook across his desk. He read it page by page, jaw tightening, eyes darkening. "I always felt something was off," he admitted. "Claire is charming, but she's clinical too. Controlled, always with an explanation, always managing access to the boys. I tried to raise a concern with Mr. Whitmore once, and he shut me down." "She's manipulating him," I said. "He thinks she's perfect." "I can file a report," he said, "and I will, but without direct evidence or access to the children, the system doesn't move fast. You know that." "Then we get evidence," I said. "Real evidence. I'll keep watching from a distance. I'll keep writing. I won't be quiet again." He looked at me for a long moment. "Be careful, Maya," he said softly. "Women like Claire don't just lie. They erase people." From then on, my life changed. By day, I pieced together temp jobs to keep the lights on. By morning and evening, I was the shadow at the edge of the Whitmore estate. I watched from fences, from bus stops, from across the street. I wrote everything down. What time the curtains opened, who came to the house, what the boys wore, whether they had new bruises or not. I recorded voice memos at night so I wouldn't forget details. And there was something else I did, something that honestly could have gotten me arrested if it had gone wrong. I went back inside that house, not as a maid this time, as a delivery girl. A friend of mine worked part-time for a floral company. She lost a tan delivery uniform for me and helped me fake a badge. I bought a bouquet of roses and lilies, tucked a tiny black recording device into the ribbon so it looked like decoration, and walked the 1.5 miles to the gate with my heart trying to punch through my ribs. When I hit the intercom, a young woman answered, the new maid. "Hi there," I said, putting a little extra cheer in my voice. "Delivery for Claire Lannister from Wedgwood Floral. She's supposed to get it this morning, super urgent." There was a pause, then a click, and the gate began to open. That sound. I'll never forget it. The sound of walking back into the lion's den. The new maid opened the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Miss Claire's out," she said. "You can just leave them in the foyer." "Sure thing," I smiled. No signature needed. While she turned toward the kitchen, I walked like I belonged there. Through the foyer, down the hallway, up the staff staircase my feet still remembered. Every step felt like walking on glass. On the second floor, I slipped into the twins' room. It looked like a magazine photo. Beds, perfectly made toys lined up in a straight line. No clutter, no crayons, no sign kids actually lived there. My stomach twisted. I slid the recorder under the lip of their table, pressing it into a little crack where it couldn't be seen, but would catch sound. I prayed it would stay. On my way back down, just as I reached the landing, I heard it. A child's voice somewhere down the hall. "No, please don't." I froze. The new maid downstairs didn't react. Either she didn't hear it anymore, or she'd trained herself not to. I turned toward the sound heart beating in my throat. It came from a door that used to lead to Isabel's yoga studio, now hidden behind heavy curtains. The door was slightly ajar. I stepped closer and peered through the crack. Claire stood inside, holding Eli by the wrist, so tight his little hand was turning red. His face was wet with tears. Ethan stood in the corner, eyes wide, arms rigid at his sides. "You embarrassed me," Claire whispered, voice low and deadly. "You made Daddy worry, and when Daddy worries, he gets angry. Is that what you want?" Eli shook his head so hard, his curls bounced. She let go of his wrist, walked to a small cooler on the desk, opened it, scooped ice into a towel, and turned back toward him. "Now hold this on your face," she said, pressing it roughly against his cheek. "Or the swelling will make you look guilty." My hand flew to my mouth, and then my foot hit a loose floorboard. It creaked. Silence. Claire's head snapped up. Footsteps. "Who's there?" she barked. Downstairs, a man's voice shouted, "Hey, who's upstairs? Security." Pattern. "Interrupt when I tell you I ran. I ran." I bolted down the staff stairs so fast I almost slipped bouquet, bouncing against my shoulder, heart hammering in my ears. I tore back through the foyer, yanked the front door, and thanked God. The little bobby pin I had dropped in the frame earlier kept the lock from fully catching. I slipped outside, let the door close behind me, like I'd never been there, and walked quickly. Not running now, no, because that would draw attention. Down the driveway until I reached the street. Then I ducked behind a parked car, slid to the pavement, and let myself shake. My hands barely worked as I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and stopped the recorder. I hit play. Claire's voice came through clear as day. "You embarrassed me. When Daddy worries, he gets angry. Hold this on your face." And Eli's muffled sobs. I smiled through tears. I had it. Proof. Not just my word. Her voice. I didn't go home. I walked into downtown Hartford, found a quiet corner, and made another call. This time to a name I hadn't said out loud in years. "Rowan and Partners, Naomi speaking." The voice came through warm and sharp at the same time. "Naomi, it's Maya. Maya William. From the shelter years ago. My mom. You helped her with that custody thing." There was a pause, then she said, "Of course I remember you. Where are you?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of her Volvo, wrapped in the smell of old leather and hot air from the vents playing the recording for her. She listened with her eyes shut, jaw clenched. When it ended, she let out a slow breath. "You said this happened today." "Yeah." "Okay," she said, already tapping on her phone. "We're going to need to timestamp this. Send it to a forensic specialist I trust. Make sure no one can claim it was edited. We're going to document everything. And Maya," she looked at me, really looked at me, "you did something incredible today. Most people would have walked away after they got slapped and fired in that kitchen. You stayed. You fought." "I was just doing what anyone would do," I said. She shook her head. "No, that's the problem. Most people wouldn't. That's how the team formed. Me with my notebook and stubbornness. Naomi with her law degree and rage in a blazer, and later a man named Ben Harlow, retired social worker turned private child welfare investigator. He showed up to Naomi's office in a flannel shirt and battered boots. Looked like he should be fixing fences somewhere, not taking down wealthy abusers. "You the maid?" he asked me bluntly. "I was," I said. "Good," he replied. "People say things around the invisible." I handed him my notebook, the audio, everything. He read it slowly, flipping through pages like they were evidence in a criminal case, which in a way they were. "I'll go to the school," he said. "Talk to the principal, the teacher, the nurse. Kids don't get hurt like this without leaving a trail." And he was right. At Westbridge Academy, where the twins went to kindergarten, the principal admitted she'd had concerns, but never enough to challenge the Whitmore name. "Their teacher, Ms., Lively said. They don't act like 5-year-olds. They act like hostages." Then pulled out folders full of their drawings she hadn't been able to throw away. Ethan's pages were all black boxes and tiny curled-up stick figures in corners. Eli's were frantic lines, scribbles cold colors. Those little drawings said what their mouths had never been allowed to. Ben brought copies back, laid them out on Naomi's desk next to my notes and the audio file. Suddenly, my feelings weren't just feelings anymore. They were evidence. Once Naomi had everything lined up, she filed a report with Child Protective Services. Not just as a random complaint, but through a child advocacy group she worked with, so it wouldn't get lost in some overworked inbox. Then we waited. Those were the longest days of my life. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach flipped. Finally, it came. CPS was sending an agent to the Whitmore estate for an unannounced welfare check. The agent's name was Dana Walsh. I wasn't allowed anywhere near the property, obviously. So on the day of the visit, I sat 3 blocks away in Naomi's car. Hands clenched so tight my knuckles hurt, while Ben watched from another vehicle with binoculars. At 11:03, a plain sedan pulled up to the gate. A woman in a dark coat stepped out, flashed her badge at the camera, and waited. The gate opened. She disappeared inside. 10 minutes. 15. 20. My mind ran wild. What if Claire turned on the charm and made Dana feel silly for coming? What if the boys were too scared to speak up? What if it all backfired and Claire claimed I was harassing them? Naomi's phone buzzed. She picked up, listened, then looked at me. "They let her in," she said. "Claire tried to stall, but Dana insisted, and she's asked to talk to the boys alone." I sat there shaking, staring at the gate like I could will it to open. Inside that house, while I waited on cold vinyl car seats, Dana sat on a white couch across from Ethan and Eli and told them, "You're not in trouble. I'm here to make sure you're safe. Someone who cares about you very much told me she was worried." Ethan whispered, "Maya," and when Dana nodded and said, "She never left you. She's been fighting for you. Every day." Something cracked open in them. When she asked, "Has anyone ever played a game with you that involved being locked somewhere cold?" They both went quiet. Then Eli whispered, "The cold game." When she asked if they wanted to go somewhere safe just for a while, they nodded. That was the twist. Not the end, but the moment where the story turned. Back in the car, all I knew was this. At 11:29, the front door of the mansion opened, and Dana came out holding the twins' hands. They had backpacks on. No Claire in sight. I started to run toward them, but Naomi grabbed my arm. "Don't," she said. "If you go near that gate right now, Claire will spin it into harassment. Let Dana do her job." So I stood there on the corner, tears blurring my vision, as Dana buckled those boys into the back seat of her car and drove them out past the gate, away from the marble floors and the freezer and the cold smiles. Ben lowered his binoculars and said gently, "They're out." I broke down. Not cute crying. I'm talking about ugly sobs, shaking, gasping for air. Because for the first time since that night in the kitchen, I felt like maybe, just maybe, those boys would live to see something other than fear. They were placed in an emergency group home, while CPS and the court system did their dance. Later that evening, when I walked into a bland little playroom with peeling paint and mismatched toys, they saw me and ran so hard they nearly knocked me over. "Maya!" they shouted faces. Finally, bright arms tight around my waist. Eli looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "You came back." "Always," I told him. "I told you I would." That hug felt better than any paycheck I've ever earned. Of course, nothing with the system is simple. There was a custody hearing emergency style at the Hartford Family Court. The building looked like every government building does, gray, tired, buzzing with fluorescent lights and stress. Inside the courtroom, though, it was a different kind of heavy. CPS on one side, Claire on the other with a small army of lawyers, and me in the middle with Naomi and Ben behind me, like a little makeshift army of our own. Judge Margot Bellinger presided, black woman, mid-60s, reputation for having zero patience for games. Thank God for her. Dana testified first, describing the visit, the boys' statements, their physical and emotional state. Naomi submitted the drawings and the psychological assessments that came from the group home intake. Then, she played the recording we'd risked everything to get. Claire's voice rang out in that quiet room. "You embarrassed me. You make Daddy worry. When Daddy worries, he gets angry. Hold this on your face." Followed by Eli's little sobs. You could feel the air change. People shifted on the benches. Claire's lawyer objected, claimed the audio was illegally obtained and taken out of context. But Judge Bellinger cut him off and reminded him this was family court, not a criminal trial, and the safety of the children came first. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand on shaking legs, raised my hand, swore to tell the truth, and told them everything. The freezer, the bruise in the garden, the cold game, The slap. The firing. The watching from the fence. The flower delivery. The ice-filled towel. The recording. The CPS visit. "Why did you keep going after being fired and humiliated?" Naomi asked. "Because they didn't have anybody else," I said. "Because if I walked away, those boys would freeze to death slowly on the inside, even if they never saw that freezer again." "What do you want now?" she asked. I looked at the judge. "I want them to be safe," I said, voice shaking, but clear. "And if this court allows it, I want to care for them. I know I'm not their blood, but I fed them, I bathed them, I put them to bed when they had nightmares. I saw them when no one else bothered to look." Claire stood up after me, smooth and collected in a gray suit, tears in her eyes, like she had practiced in the mirror. She called it a smear campaign, said I was bitter about losing my job, claimed the boys were fragile and prone to stories, said the recording was taken out of context. When the judge asked if she denied locking them in the freezer, she said, "I deny intentionally doing so. It was a game. Hide and seek. They knew how to get out, and even if they didn't, it was just a few minutes." People in the gallery literally gasped. I felt like my heart was going to punch its way out of my chest. Then she looked at me and said, "And as for custody, that woman is a maid. Mr. Whitmore would never allow his sons to be raised by someone like her." That someone like her was the final nail in her coffin, and she didn't even know it. Judge Bellinger looked down at her notes for a long moment, then said, "After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court finds that returning Ethan and Eli to the home of Miss Lannister at this time would present an unacceptable risk. Temporary custody is hereby awarded to Ms. Maya William, effective immediately. Miss Lannister is barred from contact, pending further investigation. Mr. Whitmore will be compelled to appear at future hearings regarding negligence." One hit of the gavel, and just like that, the story I'd been written into as the villain flipped. The maid they tried to throw away like trash was now in the eyes of the law the safest place for those boys. That was the big twist. The part of the movie where the whole theater would clap. In real life, I just sat there stunned as Naomi squeezed my hand and whispered, "You did it. You saved them." Life after that wasn't magical, but it was real, and it was ours. My small apartment suddenly had 2 extra toothbrushes in the cup, 3 jackets hanging by the front door, a pair of tiny sneakers always in the way. The boys started school at a regular public elementary close to home, instead of some private academy where they were just trophy kids. We went to therapy, all 3 of us, to untangle the fear and guilt and anger. Ethan's drawing slowly shifted from boxes and corners to heroes with capes and kids playing outside. Eli started humming when he played little tunes from cartoons and songs he made up himself. They still had nightmares sometimes. There were nights when Eli would wake up sobbing and curl against me and whisper, "Is the bad lady gone?" And I would tell him, "She's not coming near you again. I promise." And I meant it. Claire didn't disappear, though. People like her don't just vanish. She filed appeals, hired new lawyers, tried to get visitation, tried to demand access to the boys' medical records. She even called me once from a blocked number. "Did you really think this was over?" she said, voice lower than usual. "No sugar this time. You broke into a life you don't belong in. I built that world, Maya. You hijacked it with tears and pity. Love is weak. I made those boys strong." "No," I said, "you made them afraid. That's not strength." "I'm precise," she said, and you'll see just how precise when my attorneys dismantle your little fairy tale." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I walked back into the living room where the boys were sprawled on the floor with crayons coloring superheroes. That's what mattered. There was another hearing later in a smaller courthouse in front of Judge Pine, who was tired, overworked, and way too used to rich people asking for special treatment. Claire's new legal team tried to play her as the misunderstood almost stepmom who lost her temper sometimes, but loved those boys like her own. Naomi brought the therapist's report that said any contact with Claire would be harmful. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood up and kept it simple. "I pulled those boys out of a freezer," I said. "I watched them flinch when someone raised a hand, watched them walk like little ghosts. Since they've been with me, they laugh, they draw, they sleep. I don't care about punishing her. I care about protecting them. That's it." After a long pause, he denied Claire's motion for visitation and deferred everything back to family court. Not as dramatic as the first ruling, but every no she got was another layer of protection around my kids. And yes, I said my kids, because over time, that's what they became. There were more hearings, more evaluations, more questions about my income, my background, my ability to handle two traumatized boys. I did the classes, filled out the forms, opened my entire life to scrutiny. And in the end, the court granted permanent guardianship, then full adoption. Their last name changed on paper to match the name they'd already been calling me by for months: Mom. On the day the official adoption papers arrived, we celebrated in the goofiest way possible. Pizza on paper plates, sparkling apple cider in plastic cups, the boys' artwork plastered all over the walls. Ethan stood on a chair, again raised his cup, and said, "To toi." To family, even if we had to build it from scratch. And I swear if my heart had grown any bigger, my chest would have split open. Somewhere in the middle of all that, my story leaked online. The audio, the court case, the fact that a maid had taken down a billionaire's fiancée to save his children. People ate it up. News outlets called podcasts, emailed child advocacy groups, sent invitations. At first I said no to all of it. My life was enough of a circus. But Naomi sat me down and said, "Maya, there is some woman out there right now sitting with a bruised face and a notebook full of things no one believes. She needs to hear you." So I agreed to one event, a child welfare conference at the Civic Center downtown. I stood behind a curtain, palms sweaty, listening to people find their seats thinking, I used to mop floors for people like this. Now I'm supposed to talk to them. When they finally called my name, I walked out to the podium, looked at all those faces and said, "My name is Maya William. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a CEO. I was a maid. And I got fired after I pulled two little boys out of a freezer." You could feel the room lean forward. I didn't give them a polished speech. I just told them the story like I'm telling you now. I told them that the system didn't swoop in on its own. It moved because I refused to back down, because a doctor spoke up, because a social worker dug deeper, because a lawyer cared enough to treat me like a human being. I told them that sometimes the only difference between kids who get saved and kids who don't is whether or not somebody believes the maid. The clip of that talk went viral too. People called me a hero. I'm not. I'm a woman who got pushed too far and decided she was done being grateful for scraps. You know what I mean. But if that word, hero, makes someone somewhere listen to the next Maya a little sooner, I'll take it. I still cook in a tiny kitchen with cabinets that don't close right. I still check price tags in the grocery store. Being in the news didn't change that. What it changed was something else. The way I see myself when I look in the mirror. I'm not just the help anymore. I'm the line between my boys and the cold. So now let me turn it back to you. In a world where rich, polished people can cry on cue and blame the help for everything, who do you think gets believed first? The billionaire's fiancée or the black maid with a busted lip? If it were you sitting in that judge's chair, would you have given those boys back to the big White House with the perfect lawn, or to the woman in the thrift store dress who pulled them out of a freezer and lives in a one-bedroom apartment? Do you think our systems really protect kids? Or do they protect reputations? Until somebody forces them not to. I really want to know what you think. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Drop a comment and tell me, who do you believe in stories like this and why? Have you ever seen something like this up close, where the person at the bottom was telling the truth and nobody wanted to hear it? If it were you, what would you have done the night I opened that freezer? Hit like if you think voices like mine should be heard. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their story matters. And make sure you subscribe if you want more real stories like this. Messy, painful, but honest. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't born powerful, but I still changed everything for two little boys. And if I could do that from the bottom, imagine what all of us could do if we actually listened.